Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all on this Feast of Trumpets. As was mentioned in the offertory, this is a day that pictures the second coming of Jesus Christ. We all understand that. We could go through all of the details of that. I'm going to take a little different approach today, however. I think we all understand that Christ comes, as we're told in the New Testament, at the last trump. The trumpet will sound, the dead in Christ will rise. Those of us who are alive and remain, the saints who are alive and remain, will be caught up together with them in the clouds, and so we shall ever be with the Lord. So we understand that. We also understand that in the book of Revelation, we have a series of 7 trumpets, and it is on the 7th trumpet. Those 7 trumpets represent the day of the Lord, the time of God's wrath, when He pours out His wrath upon sinful human beings, obviously not just to punish them because He likes punishing people, but hopefully to bring them to repentance. And then at the last trump, the 7th trump, we're told, the 7th angel sounded, and the kingdoms of this world became the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ. So we understand the second coming takes place at that point. You see in Revelation 19, of course, this depiction of the second coming of Christ. He deals with the ungodly, with the wicked, those who had persecuted the saints. And He deals also with the 2 chief agents of the dragon, the beast, and the second beast, also known as the false prophet. They're cast into the lake of fire. And then, of course, He treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God. And this is He comes as warrior king. And He does all of these things. He overthrows the governments of this world. And of course, it's at that time that there's a great transition takes place. And we're looking forward to that. So this day does picture the time when Jesus Christ will appear in the heavens, when He will descend, when the saints will be raised, the living saints transformed, and will meet Him in the air. And this mortal flesh, this mortal body will put on immortality in that day. And of course, that is our hope. That's what we're looking forward to. And then we have eternity after that. But I want to take, as I said, I want to take a little bit different approach today to this. Of course, we'll have that theme, the eschatological theme, you might say, in the backdrop as we proceed through this. But let's begin in Leviticus chapter 23, where we find the basic instructions concerning the Feast of Trumpets. Leviticus chapter 23, and we'll begin in verse 23. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall have a Sabbath rest, a memorial of blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord." Okay, that's it. That's it. Now, what does that mean? You know, the other holy days, we could pretty much know what they mean, don't we? We know what they meant to the people who first received the instructions. Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of Tabernacles. It tells you something about what those feasts memorialize. But all this says is it's a memorial of blowing of trumpets. What for? A memorial of what? Just blowing trumpets? So what are you memorializing today? Blowing trumpets. Yeah, what does that mean? Well, let me read from the English Standard Version, the ESV. It says, verse 24 says, "You shall observe a day of solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with blast of trumpets, a holy convocation." So the memorial is proclaimed by this blast of the trumpets. The Complete Jewish Bible puts it this way: a day of complete rest for remembering, a holy convocation announced with blasts of the shofar. The New American Standard Bible puts it similarly. It says, "You shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation." So notice the words here that are used. The word memorial, remembering, and reminder. So a memorial, we're told the memorial is proclaimed with a blast of trumpets. We're told also it's a day for remembering, And it's announced with blasts of the shofar, according to the Jewish translation. And a reminder, NASB, a reminder by blowing of trumpets. So again, the question is, a reminder of what? A memorial of what? We understand it's connected somehow with the blast of trumpets, but what does it memorialize? And a lot of people have pointed this out and said, well, it's not clear, is it? And it isn't. The text doesn't tell you much about it. You could go through the other holy days, feast of, for example, the Passover. What does that have to do with? Well, it looks back to what happened in Egypt, doesn't it? Feast of unleavened bread, they remember the bread of haste coming out of Egypt. The Feast of Tabernacles, they dwelt in huts, remembering when they came out of Egypt, they had to dwell in huts. So all of this is pretty clear, but the question is, what did this mean to those people? Well, a memorial of what? Now, also, you notice it's connected with trumpets, a memorial of blowing of trumpets. Somehow, for some reason, now trumpets were used at other holy days. All the other holy days, all the new moons, and many other occasions. Usually it was the shofar. The picture still up there, but yes it is. That's the shofar. That's one kind of shofar. There's several different kinds. One is just a single curved horn, kind of like a cow's horn. The others are like that, and some are even have more, look almost like a corkscrew. But this is the shofar. This is a horn that was often used, but there were other kinds of trumpets that were used as well. So this survey we see. Well, first of all, we haven't seen the survey yet. I'm going to take a look at it in just a few moments. But again, if this holy day places special emphasis on the blowing of trumpets, we must ask, what is that all about? What significance did trumpet blasts have in ancient Israel? I think if we begin with that question, then maybe we can get some answers. At least I'm going to offer some explanations today. It's not going to be necessarily a complete explanation. We already know what it says, what this day pictures as far as the future is concerned, but there's more to it than that, I believe. And there are deeper lessons in it, something for us today. So let's take a look at it. Let's begin in Numbers, the 10th chapter, and as you turn there, let me give you a little bit of background, by going, first of all, to Numbers, the 9th chapter. And even before, I'll just summarize what's going on before. In the preceding chapters, you see the dedication of the Levites. You see that the tabernacle has been constructed, the priesthood has been set apart, and so it's ready to have this worship system in place. The tabernacle is now sanctified, it's set apart. And then we come to chapter 9 in verse 1, we're told when all of this had taken place. Chapter 9 in verse 1 says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month on the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt." So this is the second year after they came out of the land of Egypt, the first month, and then it goes on to tell what they did. They had the Passover. This is still in the wilderness. Second year. They had there's a lot more time yet to be spent in the wilderness. And so it goes on and describes the Passover. It describes the institution of the second Passover for those who were unclean by reason of a dead body or some other reason and could not take the Passover. But let's continue the account in verse 15. It says, "Now on the day that the tabernacle was raised up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony, from evening until morning. It was above the tabernacle like the appearance of fire." From the evening until morning, all night, you had this appearance of fire above the tabernacle. Now what was that? Who was doing that? It wasn't Moses. This was God. God's doing. He placed that the angel of the Lord, the messenger of Yahweh, was in that fire. And of course, in the daytime, let's just read on what it says here. It says, so it was always, the cloud covered it by day, and the appearance of fire by night. So in other words, this is God over the tabernacle. Whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, I should say that this represents the presence of God. So as God is doing this, whenever the cloud was taken up from above the tabernacle, after that the children of Israel would journey, and in the place where the cloud settled, there the children of Israel would pitch their tents. So they'd stop. Who was leading them? God was leading them. It wasn't Moses, was it? It was God. At the command of the Lord, the children of Israel would journey, and at the command of the Lord, they would camp. As long as the cloud stayed above the tabernacle, they remained encamped. And even when the cloud continued long, many days above the tabernacle, the children of Israel kept the charge of the Lord and did not journey. So wherever that cloud was, or that pillar of fire, as long as it stayed there, they stayed there. When it rose up, rise, O Lord. When it rose up and began to move, then they moved. So it was when the cloud was above the tabernacle a few days, according to the command of the Lord, they would remain encamped, and according to the command of the Lord, they would journey. So you get the picture here, don't you? Now then, there's more to it than that. And as I said, I ask you to turn to Numbers chapter 10, and we read something about a particular kind of trumpet that was used there. In chapter 10, in connection with the movement of the tabernacle, when God led the people through the desert, through the wilderness. And I want to point out something to you here. This was all by the grace of God. They did not involve their works. It was all by the grace of God that they were even there to begin with. They not only was their being there, their coming out of Egypt by the grace of God. It wasn't their own efforts that got them out. They didn't go before Pharaoh and said, we're leaving now. They didn't bring their armies against Pharaoh's armies and say, we're going to fight our way out of here. No, it wasn't by works. It was by the grace of God that they left Egypt. It was by the grace of God that they traveled through the desert. And they walked by faith. Of course, they got off track a little bit here and there, of course, but they walked by faith because they were following the lead of God. So it's important to point that out because there's some new covenant significance to that as well. And it also, we see continuity between the old and the new. Some people think the Old Testament taught one thing and the new something else, but that's another story for another time. We've covered some of that in the past. In chapter 10 then, let's take a look at what it says here. It says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, make 2 silver trumpets for yourself. You shall make them of hammered work. You shall use them for calling the congregation and for directing the movement of the camps. Notice that, for calling the congregation and for directing the movement of the camps. Now, I've often wondered on how and when they came out of Egypt, how they managed to come out in such an orderly fashion, because we were told that they came out like in military-style units. How did they do that? I suspect they had access to the ram's horn, or some kind of horn where they're able to make a loud noise and the people understood the different meanings of the different sounds. And that's a good way to communicate to a large crowd, especially if you don't have phones that you can send everybody a text with. And they didn't have them back then. But that's a very good way. In fact, it's been used down through history and by armies. You know, the buglers. Certain sounds mean certain things. And so I think this is probably the way they were able to so effectively move their peoples, the different tribes, the different companies, and organize them and bring them out of Egypt. It was by use of the shofar. But in this case, these are 2 silver trumpets, and there are only 2 of them. They're to be used by priests and not by other people. So he says to make these. It says in verse 3, when they blow both of them, when the priests blow both of them, all the congregation shall gather before the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Some would say, well, all the congregation means all the main representatives of the congregation. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but it sounds to me like the whole congregation is supposed to at least approach the tabernacle of meeting. Verse 4, but if they blow only one, then the leaders, the heads of the divisions of Israel, shall gather to you. When you sound the advance, so they understood what that meant, what the sound was, when you sound the advance, the camps that lie on the east side shall then begin their journey. When you sound the advance the second time, then the camps that lie to the south, or on the south side, shall begin their journey. They shall sound the call for them to begin their journey. So this is how they communicated with a large group of people camped over a very large area, and were able to effectively move about in an organized fashion. In verse 7, and when the assembly is to be gathered together, you shall blow but not sound the advance. The sons of Aaron, the priests, shall blow the trumpets, and these shall be to you as an ordinance forever throughout your generations. So this was not something that was just confined to the wilderness. It was used in the wilderness, but it's something that they would use thereafter. And remember, these are 2 trumpets. Only the priest used them. It's not the only use of trumpets. Others use the shofar for various reasons, similar to this. When you go, for example, the watchmen on the wall, when they would see an approaching enemy, how did they alert the people? Boo, with a shofar. Make the sound. They had a particular sound. They knew that was the sound of war, the sound of an approaching enemy. So the people would prepare themselves. When you go to war in your land against the enemy who oppresses you, then you shall sound an alarm with the trumpets. Not only these trumpets, but they would also use other trumpets as well. And you will be remembered before the Lord your God, and you will be saved from your enemies. Also in the day of your gladness, in your appointed feasts, and at the beginning of your months, you shall blow the trumpets over your burnt offerings and over your sacrifices and your peace offerings, and they shall be a memorial before your God. I am the Lord your God. So you see, these 2 particular trumpets, the silver trumpets, were very important to them because they enabled the priests, Moses and the priests, to gather the people, to move the people. When God said move, it's time to move. And so Moses could then summons the people through these trumpeters, and move the crowds, or they could summon the leaders or the whole congregation to approach the tent of meeting. So you see how important this was, and I would say that no doubt, this is a part of the memorial. A part, not all of it, but a part of the memorial that was to be, or what it was to be remembered when the children of Israel got in their land. So this survey of the different uses of trumpets, the trumpet blasts, the different kinds of blasts that were used that sent the signals to the people, as I said, were very important. And this Feast of Trumpets, places special emphasis on trumpets. I would say then, in answering the question, why is there a special emphasis on trumpets? I would say that just as the Passover pictured, or it called to memory what happened in Egypt, just as the Feast of Unleavened Bread called to memory of what happened in Egypt. They're coming out of Egypt with the bread of haste. Didn't have time to have leavened bread, so they had the unleavened bread. And just as the Feast of Tabernacles was a memorial of the Exodus and the events thereafter, because they were made to dwell in booths or temporary dwellings when they came out of Egypt, I would say that so the Feast of Trumpets memorializes Israel's journey through the wilderness and their reliance on the trumpets. This would call attention to the whole journey and all the lessons that at least should have been learned there. So this calls attention to the journey through the wilderness toward the promised land. And even thereafter, because the trumpets continued to be used. So when the trumpets blasted on this holy day, the people would recall the assembling of the congregation before the tabernacle, the assembling of the leaders in certain situations before the tabernacle, and the movement of the various camps in their journeys. And perhaps also some of the entanglements that they faced when they were in the wilderness, and the use of those trumpets. So this called attention to the entire experience of having gone through the wilderness en route to the promised land. And most importantly, it calls attention to the fact that it was God who led them. Moses sent out the orders to organize them because as God had instructed, but God led them. It was a reminder that their salvation was by the grace of God and not by their own works. But there's another exceedingly important event that took place in the wilderness. And I believe God intended that the Feast of Trumpets would serve as an annual reminder of this event. Remember, we're talking about trumpets here. And I don't see how you can talk about trumpets if you had been in that situation, had you come out of Egypt, had you come to Mount Sinai, and had you experienced what they experienced. I don't think you could talk about trumpets later without calling to mind this event, even though it apparently, the best we can tell, took place on the day of Pentecost. Nevertheless, it involves something that I believe pertains to this day, the day we're observing today. Let's look at it in Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. Now the people had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and in chapter 19 we'll take up the account in verse 10. In verse 10, then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people." Now that's going to be something that I think if I were there, I would never forget that experience. God is coming down to the top of the mountain in the sight of all the people. "You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, Take heed to yourself, that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow. Whether man or beast, he shall not live." So you keep Fluffy in your arms. Or you don't want him shot with an arrow. "When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain." Now get that. When the trumpet sounds long. Now do you think this experience, the fact that they're about to meet God in a very special way, they're about to see Him descend to the mountain in a special way, they're about to experience what we're going to read here in just a few moments, a tremendous experience of encountering God in this way, and this is associated with a blast of a trumpet, and it blasts long and loud. Do you think thereafter, when you would think about trumpets, or you would hear a trumpet sound, you wouldn't remember this? This is a most momentous occasion. This is something that would be etched in your memory thereafter, no doubt. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, Be ready for the third day. Do not come near your wives. Then it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the trumpet was very loud. The sound of the trumpet was very loud, so that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Obviously, this was not just a regular blast of a trumpet, of a shofar. It was a shofar sound, according to the Hebrew wording here. It was definitely the sound of a shofar, but it was very loud, loud enough, and also accompanied with the thunderings and the lightnings, that the people were scared to death. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. You can imagine what kind of fear settled in on these people. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai. Notice, the Lord came down. There's a theme here. Is there another? If you read about something else, somewhere else about the Lord coming down at the sound of a trumpet? Yeah, I think you do, don't you? Then the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Now the Lord came down, Moses went up. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? You kind of see, it's like it's symbolic of something else that we read about in the New Testament. When the Lord comes down, we go up and meet the Lord in the air. So here you have the trumpet sound, and you have God Himself coming down to the top of the mountain. So on the third day, the trumpet sounded, and it was very loud, and it was long, as we're told here. This was a sign. It was a signal. This is the meaning of it. Understand the trumpet blast started when he said, when you hear that, when the trumpet blast begins, that's your signal. Moses, that's when you take the people out to Mount Sinai. Just don't let them touch it. Don't let them touch it, because you don't want to have to bring your archers out. But don't let them touch the mountain. Keep them at a distance, but bring them so that they can meet with me and have this special encounter. So this was a signal to them. It was an alert. It was to alert the people that the Lord was about to descend to the top of the mountain, and the people were to come near the mountain, and on that day God would speak with them, and he would deliver to them his law. So what does this trumpet say? What is the meaning of it here? It means that God is about to act. It means that God is about to step into the picture. He's about to step into history, and he's about to reveal himself in a special way, and he's about to give the people his law. So the trumpet blast, we can say, calls attention to the fact that something is about to happen. Not only do we hear the sound of the trumpet and the dead rise, but it calls attention to the fact that something is about to happen. In this case, it means God himself is coming down from heaven. It means this. You know, in Scripture we read about, you go through several places in the prophets and the New Testament, you read about something called the day of the Lord. You know what the day of the Lord is? The day of the Lord is, there have been several days of the Lord. What that means is the day of divine intervention, the day of visitation, when God himself steps into the picture. That is a day of the Lord. And of course there's coming a final day of the Lord that will occur surrounding the return of Jesus Christ. So here the trumpet means the day of the Lord is coming. That means God is about to descend to the mountain. God is about to step in, to intervene, about to visit you. That's what the trumpet means here. So I believe that one of the purposes of the Feast of Trumpets is to remind us of the need to stay awake, to remain in a perpetual. In fact, if we're not awake, it means time to wake up. Time to wake up. When you hear the trumpet blast, it is time to wake up. Because God is about to step in. God is about to act. When you hear the trumpet blast, so I'm asking you now, do you hear it? Are you listening? It may not be as loud as it was back then, but there's still a blast. There's still a trumpet to be heard. So it's time to wake up if you're asleep. And of course for the rest of us, if we are awake, it's a reminder that we're to stay awake and to remain in a perpetual state of preparedness, for the day of the Lord is coming. Sooner or later, it is coming. And of course, we know that life is temporary. We know how short life is. And the older we get, we see, well, all of a sudden, where did it all go so quickly? That's what we begin to think, don't we? So for us, the day of the Lord is at hand. For all of us, really, because life is like a vapor. So rather than get into exactly when Christ is coming and how many years do we have left, etc., etc., the fact is we're in the end already. The day of the Lord is coming. You know, we live in a very troubled world. I don't have to remind you of that. You look around, you see, of course, the war in Ukraine. It seems never ending, going on and on and on. There is Israel's war on the terrorist organizations that are devoted to destroying them. That seems to be never ending. It's going on and on. You have Iran. It launched an unprecedented direct missile attack on Israel, something we'd anticipated, and sure enough, it happens. And I'll tell you this, though, if I were one of those Iranian mullahs, I would be scared. I would be very, very nervous along about now, because do you think the Israelis don't know who they are and where they are? They do. They do. And they probably figure their days are numbered. And you know what? They are. Most likely they are, because they know that they're not dealing with a bunch of dummies that don't know what they're doing. So if I were one of them, I would be very nervous at this point. But the point is, it seems like there's never-ending conflict, doesn't there? Today we have wars. We have rumors of wars. Now, you could say, well, we've always had that, and that's true. We've always had wars and rumors of wars. But you know, more and more today we hear the concerns being raised about the very real possibility of World War III. World War III? You hear that, don't you? If you watch any news at all, you hear that come up from time to time. And the use of nuclear weapons. Now, we've always had concerns, especially, after, I remember the old days of the Cold War. There's always this looming sort of a threat. You knew it could happen. You knew it could happen. Some of you may remember those days. Some of you, I don't know, maybe some of you were born after those days. I'm not so sure, the youngsters among us, but I don't see any. I think most of us are middle-aged now. But in any case, I remember those days of the Cold War, and I remember after the Soviet Union collapsed and the Berlin Wall came down and all of that. And but before then, still living in Alabama at the time, I remember a movie that came out. I can't remember the title of it. You may have seen it, but there was one hair-raising scene in it. It was about World War III, about a nuclear exchange. And this one hair-raising scene was when these people were walking along on the street and they looked. They said, "What is that?" These missiles, maybe more than two, but they saw these missiles going up, from somewhere nearby. There they go. And they, What are they doing? What's going on there? And then one guy looks up and says, "Those are Minuteman missiles." That's what they called them in those days. It means they have warheads on them. Nuclear warheads. That means they're most likely headed to the Soviet Union. And you know what that means? There's incoming. We wouldn't be firing them unless they were firing on us. So you can expect incoming. And boy, that was a hair-raising scene in that movie. It made you, whew. And when the Cold War ended, then we kind of had a little, a little respite there, I guess you could say. And relations changed between Russia and other nations. No longer the Soviet Union, it's now Russia and other nations now. It's all that split up. You know the story on that. But I remember those days very well. And I remember also after 9/11, then we became concerned about a terrorist getting a hold of a nuclear device. Even if it's just a dirty bomb, they could do an awful lot of damage. You see what they did with some airplanes. Think of what they could do with a nuclear device. So that became a concern. And now then they're talking about a possibility of nuclear exchanges in war. More than just a terrorist activity in an isolated place, although an isolated place could destroy a lot of people and a lot of property. But nevertheless, you hear this stuff and you think, you're probably thinking, surely the end is near. The end is near. And if I wanted to, I could look at the players, who they are. I could look at the situation in Israel and the roundabout nations, and I could come up with a scenario that would fit something I read in biblical prophecy and create and present to you a possible scenario for the end times. There's nothing wrong with doing that, by the way. Nothing wrong, as long as I say, look, this is a possibility. This is how it may work out. But let's suppose something a little bit different from that happens. Let me present to you a different scenario. Let us suppose that everything settles down. Now you may be thinking, oh no, at this point that's not possible. It's not possible that given what's going on in this world that things could settle down. No. But think about it for a moment. Suppose that it did settle down and the big threats now all go away. How could that possibly happen? Well, let's talk about that. It's not so doesn't sound like such science fiction after all when you think about it. One regime change could change a lot of things. Think if there were a regime change in Russia. Think if there were a regime change in Iran. You know, the Iranian people, they hate the terrorists. They hate those terrorist organizations. They despise those mullahs that are in control of the country. And if they were taken out, I don't mean taken out to dinner either, if they were taken out by Israel or anybody else, the people would not be angry about it. They would rejoice. You know, you have people all over Iran that are very much pro-Israel. They want to be friends with Israel. They want to be friends with the United States. They want to be westernized. They like our way of life better than they like what has been imposed upon them. So I can think about how a single regime change, or what if you had a couple of regime changes? It could begin to change the whole situation there. You could have Israel. Of course, the Saudis already want to get along with Israel. You have some of the other Arab nations there who are willing to sit down at the table. If you could eliminate the Iranian threat, and now you don't have anybody funding the terrorist organizations, I can see how peace might break out there. That's not such an impossible scenario, is it? And we could see the same thing happening in other parts of the world. But then, let us suppose that happens. Let us suppose we come to a time that is characterized by peace and prosperity and security. Nobody would object to that, would they? So what now? What now? Even though we may not consciously think it, in there someplace, in that old noggin someplace, is the thought, well, the end is not so near after all, is it? You might not think that, you might not say it out loud, but it'd be somewhere in there, because you wouldn't see all these tensions in the world. You wouldn't see all these things that look apocalyptic, if I may put it that way. So we would think, somewhere in there would be this thought that the end is not so near after all. But you see, when we come to that place, it becomes a little bit easier to let down the guard, doesn't it? When the tensions are not so high, when the threats are not there, when all is well, everybody's healthy and happy, a time of prosperity, a time of security, we tend, it's a human nature thing, we tend to let down the guard at that point. And that's just a reality. You know, this day, one of the lessons in this day for me is that no matter what is going on in the world, this day tells me that the trumpet call tells me, the trumpet that we're supposed to remember, the trumpet at Mount Sinai, the trumpets in the wilderness. This is a call to us to stay awake. If we're not awake, wake up, regardless what we see going on around us in the world. Let's go to one final scripture, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, read a few verses here. The Apostle Paul says, verse 1, "But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you." How am I to apply that? Now, concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, I need to write to you and tell you where we are now in Bible prophecy. I don't think so. I don't think that's a good idea. Because as soon as I do tell you that, then it's going to turn out wrong. Oh, by the way, if you ever watch YouTube or get on the internet, you will find that there's a group of people out there who they thought they're going to get raptured today. They're sure of it. They're sure of it. But you know what they're going to be thinking in the morning? Or maybe by sunset today? They're going to say, oh, I wished I hadn't put that on my YouTube channel. Or I hadn't said that in public, hadn't put it on Facebook, because I was wrong again. So you see that kind of thing out there. But Paul says, I don't need to write to you concerning times and seasons. He says, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. Get that? What does it mean? Does it mean you're going to have all this escalating signs leading right up to it, and to the point where you'll be able to say, oh, yeah, we got 3 days left, 3 days till the day of the Lord. Yeah, 2 days now. There it is. Day of the Lord is here. It says it's coming as a thief in the night. You know what that means? Unexpectedly. I mean, some people will expect it because they're awake. They're awake. But it will come unexpectedly, comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, in other words, there may come a time when there is peace and safety. And everybody's glad of it. Everybody's happy about it. Peace and safety. Peace has broken out all over the world. When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them. Because, you know, even in the best of times, there's always something lurking under the surface or over the horizon. Something else. That's always been the case down through history. So when we say peace and safety, and what does this mean? What he's saying here is people say peace and safety, and what happens when you say peace and safety? Well, the end is not so near after all, is it? We can let down our guard a little bit now. We can relax, let down our guard. But he says, but sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that the day should overtake you as a thief. He's speaking ideally. No doubt some people in the congregation did need to be jarred a little bit, awakened, made aware that they need to remain awake. But he says, you are not in darkness, so that the day should overtake you as a thief. In other words, you're staying awake. And that's what we're to do. We're to stay awake. This day tells us that we're to hear the trumpet. We're to hear the call, and that we're to stay awake. You are all sons of light and sons of the day. We're not of the night nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober. Watch means to be vigilant. It means to not let your guard down. It doesn't mean you got to watch world events to figure out exactly when certain prophecies are going to take place. That's not what his meaning is. You watch by keeping your guard up. The word means vigilance, to be vigilant. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love. And this is it. This is what we're called on to do. Putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. You let your guard down is when you lay those things aside. Don't ever do that. For God did not appoint us to wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that whether we wake or sleep, we should live forever, or should live together with Him. Therefore, comfort each other and edify one another, just as you're also doing. So, better times may or may not come between now and the second coming of Jesus Christ. But you know, there is a trumpet being sounded today. The trumpet, we have it right here. We have the sound of the trumpet right here. It's the Word of God. It's God speaking to us, just as He spoke to ancient Israel from the mountain. Just as He called them, summons them with the trumpet, He summons us and speaks to us through His Word. But again, better times may or may not come between now and the return of Christ. Regardless what's going on in the world, it is never, never, ever a good time to lay aside our spiritual armor and let our guard down. Don't care how peaceful things may be, how healthy we all are, how well things may be going. It's never a good time to let our spiritual armor or lay it aside. We always must make sure it is in place. In Exodus 19, when the trumpet began to sound, it meant that God was about to step into the picture and do something. So I ask you, on this holy day, do you hear it? Do you hear the trumpet? Do you hear the call? It's a call to wake up if you're asleep. And if you're awake, it's a call to stay awake, for the day of the Lord is coming.